I feel like it's been a minute since I've made my presence on a YouTube video here, but I've been hunting quite a bit since my last video where passed all those bucks. And I've passed more bucks, some good ones about the same size, different locations, some good hunting, and then we enter the October lull, and October lull is what it is. It's just not that good. The best thing to do, which take this advice for next season, is don't sit your best stands. Just kind of play it by ear, do some scouting, go find some different areas, and you kind of just wait for that pre-rut to kick off. So today I want to talk about, for big woods, this is big woods application only. I mean, actually, these principles apply to everywhere, but specifically big woods. How my best tips, I'm going to give a few different kind of ways to hunt the rut in the big woods. And first and foremost, I'm going to start out by saying what not to do during the rut. And there's good reason why. I understand why people do this. We're all guilty of it. And it's just so easy to do this. And that is hanging a tree stand, running a camera with some corn, and just sitting on it and sitting on it and sitting on it. And why is it so easy? Because you're baiting these deer, you're getting camera pictures, does are going to come in to feed on that. Deer will alter their normal travel routes to a pile of corn. And it's like a necessary evil up here because everybody's doing it. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to get pictures and kind of see what's going on, and you can use it in a good way, okay? I don't care for it, but it's definitely can be used in a good way to your advantage. But the worst thing to do is just go sit on a corn pile over and over and over again and just hoping that that's going to pay off, because a lot of times it's not going to pay off. Those deer know you're in there. I mean, you can only get away with things so many times before they're onto you. And yeah, you might have a lot of does, and you might get lucky and have a buck on a doe. And that's the one time during the rut where a lot of things just fly out the window. If a buck is on a hot doe, you're good. And so, wind aside, everything aside, it almost just seems like they're so fixed on that doe, as long as she doesn't bust you, you're going to get a shot. But like I said, it's a necessary evil. And you can pattern bucks during the rut right now. And there's a couple ways. One is by baiting, okay? And it's not like the early season. It's not hunting like your typical food source where you can just pattern a buck. Like early season is my favorite way to pattern a buck. Early and late season. If you find that food and you know where they're bedding, you can pattern a deer. You can know how they cut a certain wind. You can get on them. Best time to kill a buck. But during the rut is also a phenomenal time, obviously, because anything can happen, and that's what makes it so exciting. And we're in it right now. Today's November 3rd. We're in it. The rut is going on, and it's only going to get better in the next few days here. So I kind of wanted to put this out. Just, if you're not seeing deer, or if you're not sure what to do, apply these principles and hope the magic happens. But so you can pattern them in a couple ways, kind of a few ways. Two are going to revolve around baiting. Maybe all three of them, actually. It depends on how you set up and how you hunt here. But so if does are going to use this bait, right? And if you have a camera location or a stand on corn or whatever, and you have a doe group coming in every single night, that's good intel, because you can sit there and pay attention. You know when one is coming hot, right? You're going to have more than one buck showing up to that. So it's tough because you have to try to anticipate when that's going to happen. And the best way to anticipate when that's going to happen, if this is a spot that you sat last year, go back to your camera pictures. If you screenshot them or anything like that, go look at the history. If around November 7th last year you had a bunch of activity, morning, evening, does were coming in, bucks are coming in, more than likely a day or two behind or that same day, so if that happened on the 7th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, get out there. Even those 3 days in a row, that won't necessarily burn up that stand. That's what I would do. I would give that the best shot going off of history. Another way is sometimes if you go to a new location, if you know what buck is in an area, you have a general idea where he's bedding. You don't know exactly where he's bedding or kind of exactly where he's coming from, but you have the slightest idea. One thing that does work with this with putting some corn down is typically within the first couple days or 3 days, they are going to come, and more than likely a bigger buck. When I talk about corn baiting, you're going to get lots of 1.5, 2.5-year-old deer, maybe 3.5-year-old deer that you can shoot off of that. But for the most part, it's hard to shoot a big buck off of a bait pile. I don't think that's the way to go if you're targeting a big buck. But typically in the first 1, 2, 3 days that you put that bait down there, it could be morning or evening too. I've noticed this. A big buck will show up typically in the daylight, kind of discovering that bait if they're close by. I'm not talking if they're 2 miles away, a doe's got to bring them in. But if they're close by, they might discover that and hit that in daylight. So you have to have that anticipation to set it up correctly, get out there and get your spot, plan out ahead of time where you're going to sit, where you're going to put the bait, where the wind is going, what you expect them to do. And in that first 3 days that you put it in there, maybe it's all 3 days, maybe the wind is right all 3 days. But if you have one day out of those 3 that the wind is right, get in there. Get in the morning, even get in the evening. It's not like the greatest advice, but that is one way to try to kill a big buck on bait. So that is sort of a pattern. It's more anticipation than a pattern. And another way is just, watching your camera with these does, and basically it's almost along the same lines where you get this buck that shows up in the morning and it's a new deer. This is what I see. A lot of times it's a new buck. If he's in that area, he's in there for a certain reason. Typically it's going to be a doe. And if he showed up and he hit that bait in the morning, get back in there in the evening. Highly, there's high chances that he might come right back in the evening. I've seen that before too. So, like I said, it's a necessary evil. It can work, but I think there's a little better ways to go about it. But pay attention. Look at history, photos if you have history of that spot, and that stuff is money. I mean, if Buck was in that area, he was in there for a reason. Not just because he's wandering 2 miles to find your corn pile. Okay, so set up on that accordingly. And two of the biggest things on top of trying to kind of put together this like pattern that I'm talking about, or like this, it's more so like anticipation, and that is huge. What I mean by that is, like, say tonight, for example, we've had like 3 really warm days, and the deer's still moving, they're still doing their thing, but most of us are kind of like, this isn't very ruddy, you're not seeing like a ton of pictures or seeing a ton of action. But something like tonight, the temperature, it's cloudy out, and we have rain coming. So we have rain coming around like 10 p.m. or something like that. So I didn't see too many deer on my cameras like yesterday, or especially last night. That makes me think, like, you know what? I didn't see a lot of movement last night. Super windy out. That probably held them a little tighter. They still moved, but probably didn't move super far in daylight. And tonight with this rain coming in, it was still kind of windy all day. It kind of dies a little bit tonight, and we have this rain coming. Anticipate that. They're going to probably move before that rain comes, because it's supposed to rain all night if the forecast is right. So it's like little things like this, like try to anticipate it. Pay attention to the weather. Don't get so fixed on, I need a northwest wind with a cold front. I need barometer to rise up to 30.1 and, temperature drop. Yeah, I mean, that's great. We all want that. But don't get fixed on that. They're going to move with all sorts of winds, all sorts of temperatures. But try to anticipate, what you think could happen next. That's like my biggest tip. And then trust your instincts. If your gut tells you that you think a deer might visit this stand location or this camera or be in this area because of like these small little factors, like I mentioned, like this weather, like I think a couple bucks that I'm kind of targeting, I think might show up tonight. So I'm going to get in there and anticipate that. So try to put together all these little things, and trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. It backfired on me this year. I second guessed myself, thought I was too exposed in like one location versus the other, and I could have killed the buck I was after. So trust your gut, get in there, and just have some fun hunting. The biggest thing, you hear this all the time, is hunt the does, hunt the does. Well, that sounds great, and I mean that sounds so easy. Like, I'm gonna hunt the does and the bucks are gonna come. Well, it's not that easy. Not in the big woods. I mean, does, well, they'll do anything. They'll bed anywhere. They'll move anywhere, any time of day. Like, it's not so easy to say hunt the does, but you can set yourself up where you think does are gonna be. So if you know where there's some doe bedding, get in that area, get in between these bedding areas. And if you can find any sort of funnel or pinch point, which that word gets thrown out a ton, and to be honest, there's not a lot of those in the big woods. So that's all good in Iowa and southern Wisconsin and southeast Minnesota and places like that. But you don't have that up here. You don't have these big bluffs. You don't have tons of ag field and little pinch points. So that's tough. So to say hunt the does, it's not so easy. So with that being said, that we don't have like these pinch points or these funnel areas that are super obvious compared to some other areas, we do have certain things that you can kind of narrow down movement. There's a few different ways. So if you're in somewhat like a little hilly country, I guess I don't know how else to describe it, but like if you have some oak ridges, that's a perfect example. If you have some ridges, well, you're gonna have some up and down, and if these cuts are big enough, those are like little thermal hubs. So they're going to use that for scent checking. They're going to go up high to scent check. A lot of times high, these does are going to be bedding high. These bucks might be bedding low. If food's high, the deer will bed low. Typically what you see. But these bucks are going to be high and low. They're going to be scent checking this kind of stuff. So if you anticipate like with the wind what they might be doing. So if a west wind sets up for you to sit down low in this cut where your wind is blowing away from where you think these deer are going to be scent checking, sit that spot, or go sit high, sit on the backside of this knob or something like that. Use that to your advantage. Don't just sit right in the middle of like big wide open flat oaks. My point is like try not to just sit out in the wide open because you can see far. I think that's a mistake, but still in this up and down you're still going to see a little ways. Well, you might go sit one night low or high and you might see deer using a certain, it could be a backside of a ridge, it could be cutting it could be a little saddle, something like that, something small like that. Typically like a saddle in between two high spots, drops down a little bit and then you got cuts on both sides. That, right there's your kind of like funneling area on a ridge system. So think about that if it applies to where you hunt. Sit off of that maybe the first time if you're not sure, or sit off of it with the wind in your favor for the first time and just sit there and see if you see some deer using that. Then hey, does are going to be using that for sure. Get set up on that stuff. And then if you're in like flatter country, there's going to be some form of edge, and it could be like a hard edge, soft edge. What I mean by that is like you have a road there. It's like a hard edge, that kind of limits some movement more than likely. They will cross roads, obviously. Sometimes they'll use them, like these old logging roads, they'll even use them. Or if you have a clear cut or something like that, you're going to have some form of edge. So a lot of times these deer like to use this edge or right off of that edge. So think about that. You can kind of set up like that. Don't go set up just in the middle of the woods because your camera and corn pile is there. Try to use this edge, some terrain feature to your advantage. That's kind of the best way in the big woods to, have these funnel points or pinch points or whatever you want to call them. I don't really call that here. I just more so call it hunting edge, hunting this diversity in terrain. That's how you can kind of narrow it down. So start thinking about that in your head. Like, what do you have in your hunting spot right now? You have like these like clear select cut oak trees next to solid oak trees. Right there's a soft edge right there. Or is it butted up to pine trees? Right there's an edge. Sometimes they're going to use that edge, and especially if there's a little bit up and down or there's a saddle somewhere mixed in there. Think about these kind of locations. Those are the spots to go set up on. Don't get so fixed on this corn. Just go set up on these spots and have some fun. But if you know where does are, that's awesome. You're ahead of the game. Get around those does if you can. So if you know that like they're up on a ridge, I'm gonna throw like an example out here. If you know there's some doe bedding, you have a little bit of hill country kind of, and when I mean hill country here in the big woods, at least in northern Wisconsin, it isn't much. It's a little drop off or whatever, but you use that to your advantage. They use that kind of stuff. If there's any ledge on that or any bench on that, that is probably a good travel area. Set up on that during the rut. Don't worry about your camera. Don't worry about your corn at this point. Make it fun. Hunt differently. Start moving around. The worst thing you can do in the rut when you expect a big buck to be on his feet is just sitting the same place over and over and over again. I don't think that's the way to do it. But back to the example. If you have like this little like high spot and it's a little oak flat, and does probably are going to bed on the backside of that. So, they bed right in that kind of stuff. That's what I see a lot around here. So, let's say, depending on what the wind is blowing, let's say you have like a cut or a couple of cuts leading up to this. Well, what I would do is like, if the wind is coming, let's say northwest or westerly wind on this kind of setup right here. So you have this little flat, you have this knob, and there's some doe bedding and food, which is perfect because they're going to be right by that food. A buck is going to be checking this stuff. So here's like an example where don't get so fixated right on this food, but bump off a little bit to where they might circle around right through here with this low spot when the wind is blowing in their face to check, because a lot of times when they're checking, it's not just visually with eyes, like running through these spots. They'll scent check these does before they work their way up into this doe bedding or this food source. So sit off somewhere like this right here and try to catch this buck moving around. You see what I mean? So try to do stuff a little differently than what you've been doing. Don't just get so fixated sitting on food. But food is great because does are eating. So if you are on a good food source and you have does coming in consistently, at some point there's going to be bucks in there. So try to anticipate. Trust your gut and anticipate what's going on. I actually had to write a few things down because I could sit here and ramble on for hours and half of it will make sense, half of it won't. But so what I have right now is patterning by history photos. We kind of went through that. Corn baiting. Yes, you can develop a pattern. It's a necessary evil, I feel like. I have nothing against it. I wish we didn't have it up here, but we do, and it's everybody's right to use it. So, but use it wisely. There's ways to strategize with corn baiting instead of just, it's really easy to keep sitting in the same stand. Why? Because you don't have to go in there a couple hours earlier, or however early it takes you to get another stand up in the tree. Your stand is already there. You got a camera there. It's telling you the deer are here. It's so easy to keep going back to that spot, So I think we all fall victim to that. Try to break that habit in the next 2 weeks and see what, hunt differently. Hunt like you're a predator out there trying to kill this deer. Imagine this deer is, let's say this deer is hunting you, How are you going to set up if you've been going in and out in the same spot? You're leaving your scent nonstop, in and out. You're sitting in the stand. They know what you're dropping bait off. They know you're in there. So, picture that they're hunting you. They know this. Hunt off of that where where they can't see you so easy, or they don't know you're coming in. You know what I mean? It's a weird way to put it, but just hunt differently, I guess, if that makes sense. And one thing I wrote down too, don't wait for the right wind, okay? When it's rut like this, you have to get in there. If you have history photos, or if you just got a buck picture, or one's in the area, get in there. Don't wait for the right wind for your existing stand. So they're gonna move on all sorts of winds. Try to use the wind, but don't get so fixated on it like it's early season kind of hunting or whatever, early October, where like I would only hunt certain winds and I would try to sit an off wind. That gets a little tougher right now because deer are gonna be all over the place. But what I mean by don't focus on the wind is, if your stand sets up great for a north wind, and that's the wind you need, but last year you had a bunch of pictures of a couple bucks on November 7th, and on the 7th you don't have that north wind, you have a west wind or just whatever, east wind or something like that, where it's like, it's not a good wind for that stand. Adjust, move a stand. It could only be a couple hundred yards. You don't have to be right on that bait. Adjust that stand to where that wind is going to work somewhat in your favor. So pay attention to that. Don't get focused on just cold fronts and winds. Like, they're in the rut, they're going to constantly move. Another thing, let me see what else I put here. If you can find any travel areas, so if you have a spot that you found like what you think is a primary scrape area, that obviously during that pre-rut that probably heated up quite a bit. So I don't necessarily focus crazy on scrapes right now because like they're chasing these does. So does are going to be concentrated around their bedding and food. So that doesn't mean I'm not talking corn pile food here. I'm talking about what they're oak trees, or if there's happen to be ag field by you. That's a little tough though, because there's only certain times where you're going to see those big bucks out in the wide open like that. Probably morning sit. But if you have any sort of funnel area or any little, even if it's like a little draw or a little cut or something like that, you probably all have an idea in your mind where like, yeah, this is probably where deer move through quite a bit. It's not where I have my stand or my, my corn camera or whatever. That's fine. Get in those areas, check it out, get in there in the morning, sit until 11 or noon. Which brings me to my next point, like all day sits. I'm not a huge fan of all day sits. I think it sounds cool, but it kind of sucks. And typically there's not too many spots that are going to be good necessarily for all day. So you're going to have your kind of morning location. You're going to have your evening location. So morning, I'm going to try to find these travel areas, these or like this doe bedding or in between bedding areas. If you think you know where these deer bedding, bucks and does, try to get in that stuff or in between that kind of stuff, and then sit that from morning until the afternoon, because that's going to be where they're cruising a lot, especially if it's like thicker in there. It's where they bed, obviously. Those are the kind of spots that you kind of want to sit in there and put some hours in all the way until like the midday. And then in the evening, rotate. You can still hunt all day, you just don't have to hunt the same stand. Get back onto that like food source where those does are going to be moving into, because that's where you're going to have bucks cruising in the evening. And they're not going to be in that bedding area just cruising around in the evening necessarily, because they're looking for does. Yeah, that's about it. That's kind of all I have. I thought I was going to ramble on much more, but mostly just like this corn baiting thing, because that's what we have up here in the North Woods. I just think you can use it to your advantage, definitely. Like I said, history photos, that is going to be the best way to pattern bucks right now during the rut. You're not going to have them like using the typical bedding to food kind of transition. You don't really see that too often. Maybe some of these younger deer, because it seems like around here they're just kind of confused. They don't know what to do. But I mean, if you're after like a bigger buck or older buck, use those history photos. They were in that area last year for a reason. They will be again this year too. And typically that reason is a doe is coming in heat, or you have a couple does in the area that are coming in heat. So that usually that cycle usually happens year to year. It could be off a day or two or whatever, but around that same time frame, use that to your advantage. And then lastly, Like I said, does will come into your bait. There's no doubt about it. All sorts of deer will come into your bait, and it kind of creates this like social hub. So sometimes you'll see around your bait, especially like early October, you'll start seeing this happening. You'll see like scrapes getting laid down around your bait. It's just like this social multi-buck kind of usage of it. Does and fawns are going to hit it. So yeah, those are great areas. If you can time it right, if you can anticipate it, it does work out to your advantage. You could be running a bait for quite a while. As long as you just haven't really overpressured it, if you've been out of there for a little while, it'll definitely work. I mean, they will come and check that, but I think the worst thing you can do is just keep hunting the same stand over and over and over again because that buck showed up last week in the daylight or at 5:30 p.m. right before dark. You know, he moved in there, and that's just what you're holding on to. It's so easy to hold on to that stuff. Break that habit. Try to get out of that habit. Move around. Have some fun. And we're in it. Here's the rut. I mean, this is like, this is it. It's like the Super Bowl of hunting right here. So have some fun, move around, take some chances. Don't be afraid to do some risky sits. You know, don't worry about the wind sometimes. I mean, don't knowingly, you know, hunt a spot where it's like, I think this buck is coming right down this trail tonight, but my wind is right down that trail. Like, okay, probably not going to want to sit that spot. But you can sit off of that a little bit. Shift. Sit 40 yards to one direction of that or something like that. Or 30 yards, whatever you're comfortable shooting. That might work. You know, that just, you got to move your stand though. So whether it's a climber, a little mobile setup, you know, a saddle or whatever you guys use, or if it's a ladder stand or a regular heavy tree stand, you're going to have to shift it a little bit. You're going to have to put in the work and kind of move it. So that's kind of my best advice for big woods. It's tough. It's not like get into the doe bedding and hunt these pinch points. I mean, you don't see a ton of that, especially on public land. You don't see a lot of that stuff. So that's hard advice to say. Yes, that works great. If you have something like that you can hunt, get in there, hunt it. But it's a little tougher. So for the most of us up here, it revolves around corn. You know, whether it's cut cornfield or it's your corn pile, it revolves around that. So kind of use these tips. Think about it, how you've been going about it. Look at past camera pictures, you know, even the seasons. You just see how these deer used it or whatever. Where do you think they're coming from? And try to get in there and set up on them like that. And good luck. I hope you guys shoot a buck. I'm hoping to shoot a buck in this next week. I feel like it's been a long time coming. I've passed a lot of deer, and I'm just frankly kind of tired of passing on deer. And it's a good problem to have, but you know, we don't have a lot of like real big bucks that I'd love to shoot around here. So I'm thinking the next, you know, 130-ish deer, which is absolutely solid for northern Wisconsin. That's the buck that everybody's trying to get after, that hopefully I can shoot. So, and I'm gonna try my best to get it on film and keep doing as many videos as I can that I feel like are relevant and apply to everybody hunting up here in the big woods. But thanks for watching. Hopefully you took something out of this. I know I kind of rambled and I had a little list down and then I kind of went off my list, and this is the kind of stuff where I could just sit down and talk for hours about it. So I don't want to do that. But if you took something to this, you like this, I hope it helps you guys. Like, even if it's just the smallest little detail, I hope it helps you guys. And please hit subscribe. Helps me a ton. Makes me, kind of lets me know that I'm not putting out garbage. And drop some comments. I'm curious to see what you guys are seeing and what's going on in the big woods. So thanks for watching.